And I'd like to begin with a quote from a Tibetan biography of the Buddha, written in the 18th century by a great writer, Tsecho Lingzhen Yishi Gyaltsen, who was the tutor of the 7th Dalai Lama and 8th Dalai Lama, both. And he begins this way. He says, "For a Buddha to visit earth is as extremely rare as for an Udumbara flower to bloom from earth to heaven. Why? To become a Buddha in the world, one must conceive the supreme spirit of enlightenment and accumulate massive stores of merit and knowledge for an immeasurably long time over 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes. Innumerable relativities must be arranged, such as purifying the Buddha verse, fulfilling the vows, and developing the continua of the disciples. It is very difficult to arrange so many relativities. Therefore, this world is usually sunken in ages of darkness, and the illuminated aeon of a Buddha's advent is barely a possibility." So I always like to begin with this because there's so many things in this paragraph that may mystify you if you think about it. In Asia, to become a Buddhist, you have to you do something called taking refuge in the 3 jewels, it is called, in the 3 precious gems. And these precious gems are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha means the teacher of the teaching of enlightenment. The Dharma, in this case, means the teaching. It actually means enlightenment itself. It means reality, actually, itself. Nirvana, which is reality, which is that's a nice thing, that the actual reality is the goal. In other words, what we are seeking, those who are seeking freedom or happiness, is actually the reality of what we are living. That's a nice thing about it. And the Sangha is the community through history of beings who are trying themselves to implement the Dharma, the teaching, and realize reality, who are trying themselves to become Buddhas. Buddha is like a human being, like human, it's in the category, or God. It's a type of creature, entity. A being is a Buddha. And there are millions and millions of Buddhas. There's countless numbers of Buddhas in the Buddhist world. All of the Buddhists believe, all the different kinds of Buddhists. And they come in different worlds, and they're all over. They're like Star Trek, they're like the Federation. They're all over the galaxy, and infinitely over the galaxy. But on the other hand, there are many worlds in which they are not, for many periods of time, as the Tsecho Lingzhen Rinpoche said in his biography. And so when we live in a world, from the Tibetan point of view, when we live in a world where there has been a Buddha even as recently as a few thousand years ago, and there still is a record of the presence of that Buddha, and there still is the remnant of the teaching of that Buddha, some texts, some artwork, some ideas in the different cultures, then we are very fortunate, is what he means to say. That is why he begins his biography that way. He says it is as rare for a Buddha to visit earth, is as extremely rare as for an Udumbara flower to bloom from earth to heaven. And a Udumbara flower is a strange flower like Jack and the beanstalk in Indian Buddhist mythology. Its roots are in the hells, which in that cosmology are way down underground in the underworld life. And then the stalk grows up like Jack's beanstalk, comes up through the human realm, somewhere in India. And the bloom is in the Brahma's heaven, in God's heaven. And then it has this elixir drop, like a tiny little elixir drop, which only Brahma can take. And then what Brahma does is Brahma takes that drop in some kind of little divine jewel-created vial, and he brings it down and he gives it to the baby Buddha when a Buddha is born. It's a wonderful. The Indians had a great imagination, which is why Buddha went there, I think. Because they could imagine him. And you don't want to go somewhere where people can't imagine you, because then they usually do you in to sort of like get rid of the problem. So So anyway, today we're going to really be talking about what is a Buddha, to try to like open our imagination. And I refer to science fictional things because we really have to imagine something different, because Buddha is not just an ordinary being who then gets some good ideas like sort of Socrates or someone, a human who becomes a wise person. I mean, he is that too, but he becomes beyond human from the Buddhist point of view. And also the Theravada Buddhists, not only the Tibetan Buddhists or the Chinese Buddhists, all of the Buddhists believe that a Buddha is, in fact, the Buddha has a special name. He's called the Deva Manushya Shasta, teacher of humans and gods. Teaches gods as well as humans. And has an extraordinary sort of energy, and it's kind of like an infinite being, actually, a Buddha. Buddha is not a being who lives inside their skin, like, for example, you and I, and gods, actually. We think, if any of us asked, well, who are you? We'd sort of like thump the chest, or I would if I didn't have all these mics. And, we'd think, well, I'm this thing here inside the skin, the brain, my idea, etc., sort of here, over here, that's me. And I'm not you, and I'm not the wall, and this and that. But a Buddha doesn't perceive reality like that. A Buddha is not a limited being like that. A Buddha is actually an infinite being who has no limitation in their being, yet they are capable of manifesting in apparently finite forms, because it wouldn't do us much good if they wanted to, they couldn't interact with someone if they didn't seem to be localizable somewhere, I mean, try to interact with someone who's suffusing every one of your cells and is floating around you like a cloud. You wouldn't know you wouldn't be able to see even such a being. And just be like a kind of field around you or something, or in you and around you, and they couldn't talk, So therefore, Buddha capable simultaneously of manifesting like that, certain, as if they were an individual, or even many simultaneously, apparently. Capable of being many beings simultaneously. It's like a biological achievement. It's like an evolutionary achievement. It's something extraordinary, Like the difference between a little kite that you might fly and a giant, Boeing 737-07 or something, huge super plane, It's like it's something that has developed that is just completely inconceivable, actually, to someone who hasn't really spent time thinking about it. So why is to become a Buddha in the world, is it difficult, and why is it so extremely rare? To become a Buddha in the world, one must conceive the supreme spirit of enlightenment. This is a new concept for many of you, I think. The spirit of enlightenment. The Sanskrit word is bodhicitta. Tibetan word is jangchub sem. Spirit of enlightenment is a specific thing, a different kind of sort of core attitude that a person conceives in a certain moment, and you will see that it is something unusual to conceive of. For example, it's like a soul, a new soul that a being achieves at a certain moment in their evolution. For example, now I'm an ordinary being, and I'm thinking that I perceive the world from within my sort of self-centeredness, which I believe is normal, right? I think I'd be worried if I didn't know where I was or who I was. You'd be more worried. I would also be worried, because I'm a normal being, and I think of myself as this and opposed to that. And so, therefore, I'm also preoccupied with myself. I want to make sure that I'm happy, that nothing bad happens to me. I think about that. I wake up thinking, like, what shall I do? What shall I avoid? What shall I gain today? What shall I do? I'm seeking my own interest, in other words, naturally, instinctively. I'm programmed like that. When I conceive the spirit of enlightenment is a very difficult thing to do. First of all, I have to decide that there's a state of awareness that is not like the one I have, that is not focused just on myself, that is as aware of what others feel, as aware of things from other perspectives, as equally as I am aware of things from my perspective and what I feel. You follow me? That's kind of complicated. Like being an empath, magnified enormously, like where you felt everyone's feeling at the same time as your own, sort of like that. A multi-dimensional, multi-perspectival empath, if you can imagine that. And I would get a hint, sort of, that there was such a state of being, that someone had achieved this kind of... Now, it's not that preposterous. You all look kind of amazed. But isn't that preposterous? Because have you been in love ever? Do you remember? Or maybe you are in love. or you were in love when you had your baby, or, in other words, that at that time you identified with another being so completely that you kind of really thought about their state of happiness. You saw things from their perspective in order to make sure everything was all right for them. You were so much caring for them until it wore off. and then you were back to like, where am I sitting here? What am I getting out of it? Right? But we all had those, what we might call identity expansion times, right? And so we know that that's possible to be in that state, and which is different from our normal self-preoccupied state. So by that kind of analogy, and by learning, and by going to like courses like Basic Buddhism, or by meeting some sort of enlightened or semi-enlightened person like the Dalai Lama, or like Shakyamuni Buddha, or like Nagarjuna, or Tsongkhapa, or Padmasambhava, something like that, then one gets the intimation that there may be a different mode of consciousness that is not egocentric, that is sort of other-centric or multi-centric, but you're not quite sure how to express it, but something anyway different. And you also get the idea that such a being is much more cheerful themselves, happier than you have been, than we have been by being sort of focused on ourselves and never quite having enough. And therefore that it might be a good idea to try to become like that. And not only that, but that being who had that kind of awareness seemed more capable of making others happy than you feel you are. So you have this sort of series of intimations when you encounter such a being, either through your imagination, through encountering a work of art, meeting an actual living person, reading something, some poem, or reading some ancient thing, or meeting the Dharma of such a Buddha, the teaching, the speech of such a Buddha, which is so valuable in that it communicates that kind of possibility to our imagination. So when you do that, then you get suddenly the idea, wow, I wish to fall in love, to expand my identity, to be able to identify with all beings effectively and exactly, and thereby be able to actually succeed to make them happy and bring them the fruition that they all really wish, the happiness that they wish. Or in Buddhist language, I determine I must become a Buddha myself in order to establish all beings within happiness. That is the conceiving of the spirit of enlightenment, right? That's maybe difficult, a little bit. It's a messianic spirit. It's a spirit of of deciding to sort of put all of one's effort throughout all of one's lives. It's sort of make an infinite effort to achieve an infinite goal for the sake of all beings, right? So that's how someone begins the process from the human state of becoming a Buddha. And that is a rare thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. For example, in our culture, by our referring to the Western modern, not only Western nowadays, the sort of cosmopolitan modern culture, materialistic culture, such a spirit of enlightenment conception is totally impossible to create on the basic reality view that we're taught, that we're indoctrinated with. Why? Because it is impossible to become an infinite being and to satisfy infinite beings if you only have a few years to live and then you become nothing. And everything you do in those few years comes to nothing. Anything you do spiritually, anything you cultivate within your soul basically comes to nothing. Because it is nothing. Because there is no soul, there's no future life, right? There's no further existence. That's how, some of you may have a feeling there's something, but I'm saying if you do, it is contrary to the common sense convention of our society that this is it, this is our life, and it's only lasts for as many years until death. And then the body is disposed of and the consciousness has ceased, although when people talk about going on in the memory of the loved ones and you try to donate something somewhere to get your name on a plaque, or whatever, there's these kind of things, but you personally, your own consciousness does not continue, is basically our preconception. Therefore, within such a reality view, it would be irrational, it would actually be insane to say I'm going to become a Buddha as defined as an infinite being in order to make all other beings happy. In other words, in order to become a Buddha in a way, you have to have, if not infinite time, plenty of time. and plenty of lives. You know, you bit by bit, you know, we can see, and materialist science also teaches the amazing thing in their own evolutionary sense of having been some sort of a monocellular little glip animal that gleeps along on a petri dish, you know, glumping the thing in front of it, you know, a little blip, 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 like a little Pac-Man, you know. And having been that, and then evolving, the genes, the selfish genes, would hop from vehicle to vehicle, and they hop off this Pac-Man into the fatter Pac-Man over there, and then over here the lizard and the crocodile and the fish and the whatever it is, and finally Carl Sagan, you know, in the end, getting tenure at Cornell, you know, sending out a message to outer space. I mean, that is a long progression and fantastic evolutionary thing, right? I mean, so therefore, and you know, it's amazing, that is, all the elaborate cellular and genetical, but of course, that's not done by any one person. It's done by a sort of genetic process, random mutation, natural selection, you know, just a completely impersonal material process, biological process, right? So we can conceive of such an amazing thing like that, given such a huge billions of years, right? That could happen. And in the Buddhist worldview, where you're going to be around for billions of years anyway with other beings, billions of lives, thought of as a normal thing. And interconnected with that kind of biological evolutions in different physical environments. You're not in only a spiritual environment, you're in physical environments, not just this planet, but many different planets. But the only additional factor is that you as a person keep hopping around from slime to slime. The slime hops and you also hop. You know, you and the gene like are hopping together around, and then you've been every animal, and we've all been dinosaurs, you've also been gods, you've been all different kinds of human beings, all different races and things, and you've been Vulcans, we've all been Vulcans, we've all been Klingons, you know, and Romulans, and we've all been all of them. You know. But anyway, from the Buddhist point of view, you have to have the aim to do that originally. You have to conceive the spirit of enlightenment, namely decide, well, if I'm in this sort of swirling ocean of life forms, and I am a life form within that, and I swirl around from life form to life form, driven by impulses and occasionally by good moods and good moves, and I do beautiful things and I become more beautiful, or I do bad things and I become more ugly, and I sort of go back and forth and do all that. And if I'm going to do that for a long, long time, or in fact for no conceivable end in sight, and I'd rather be in the good places than bad, and also I'd rather have the others that I'm intertwined with, because we keep popping up with each other. We were riding around in some piece of slime at one point, and we couldn't talk, we didn't know about humans or anything. We were sliming along there. Carl was with us too, you know? And we were in Precambrian mud, sliming around, or methane sea or whatever, and then now we're here, you know? And then we'll be back in that too if we keep going endlessly, because there's unlimited possibilities of the future. So then we decide, well, if we're in this together like this for an endless period of time, maybe it's a good idea to choose to optimize our being together and to make sure that we're all in the best condition that we can possibly be. And every life we do one thing that will move one of us or many of us towards a better state. And then since we have infinite time, ultimately we'll all reach an infinite state of happiness. And you know, whether or not, however long it takes, and however much effort it takes, it is actually rational to make the determination that I'm going to contribute everything I can towards that goal. Do you follow me? It's not a teleology, a naive teleology like in monotheism, where somebody made it like that and they are pushing everyone towards a certain end. It's a teleology of I'm going to push everyone like that. Each of us makes, which is interesting. But that's hard to come to, and only one would have to have all those ideas, and you'd have to remember, to conceive the spirit of enlightenment, you have to encounter the idea of enlightenment and be able to imagine a consciousness that isn't yours. You know, like human beings, right? Even in evolutionary biology, they rightly say that the human being is like evolves beyond the animal and gains power over it. They all do it in terms of the hunter and the mighty battle, and because they're all into the military budget. But they do it like that, but the way that you get that power is that you develop this imagination, so you sort of can figure out 6 different ways of spearing that tiger, or how the tiger might come. You sit and imagine you're a hunter, and you sit there and you imagine 4 different ways of defeating the tiger, and then finally you pick up and sharpen a stick and get the tiger. So it's by the ability to imagine different possibilities that the human gains this manipulative power and this sort of greater optionality, you see, and therefore greater control over things, right? But the one thing that we don't normally do or easily do is actually imagine a different type of consciousness. It's not easy to imagine. You know, you look at me, I look at you. If I feel a certain way, you know, when you're in a certain mood, you look at others and they look all cheerful to you. You're in a really bad mood, they look all like they're about to attack you or something, you know. We project into other beings exactly whatever our state of mind is. We assume that other beings are feeling the way we are, you know. And that's normal, to do that. But then you have to imagine that there might be another kind of consciousness in another being, and then a qualitatively completely different kind of consciousness. And that's a thought that is very hard. I must have studied Buddhism myself for 20 years before I suddenly realized that the reason I like this couple of gurus that I have had, been lucky enough to have, who definitely had a qualitatively different kind of consciousness than me, and not only as gurus, some people who weren't my gurus also, I think, there was something different about them, and I finally was able to articulate that. I thought, well, that because maybe, whereas when I was sitting with them, you know, they were over there, and of course I assumed that since you're over there, that you see me as I'm over here, and we're sort of both like signaling out from in our spaces, you know, our separated spaces, like, hey, hello out there, we make a word, we share a language, you know, and we're semaphoring out to a being who's as trapped inside their skin and their self-centeredness as we're trapped inside ours. And the idea that there might be someone there who could sort of feel my perspective in the situation the same as their own at the same time. It took me 20 years to imagine it. Really. It's hard even to imagine. You have to make an effort. You know, imagine that idea. And then that must be why I feel a little better with that person. Because usually, you know, when we're with people, it's like, it's always measuring what do they want from me, you know, what do I want from them, how use are they to me, what use might I be to them. And we're sort of like, if we're sort of friends, and we're temporarily, you know, okay, we sort of relax. You know, that's why we like familiar people. And we get nervous with unfamiliar ones because we think they might. So we're always doing that with others, you know, because we're so completely trapped in our self-interest and self-perception, instinctively so. So to imagine a being that is not that way, that is quite lightly aware of their own self, and therefore open to being aware of other self from the other's perspective. And then you sort of imagine that, then you imagine that magnifying enormously. Then you begin to get an imagination of enlightenment, of a Buddha. Okay? So then massive stores of merit and knowledge over a measurable long time, over 3 incalculable aeons, yes, of lifetimes, accumulate massive stores of merit and knowledge. So then actions, positive actions, are analyzed. It's kind of a category thing. You know, in relation to others, giving gifts is the nice thing to do to others. Being generous, giving to them. Taking from them is a not nice thing to do. So when you give to others, you somehow expand, you make them more happy. Since you are interconnected with them, this makes you bigger as a person when you give. When you take, because you want to be bigger, actually it makes you smaller. It's a very, very interesting thing. So you get more property, and you may have to, like, if it's food, you're going to get fatter. But somehow, by being fatter, then you feel weaker inside, and you'll keel over, you know, you'll have a heart attack, you know, if you really keep it up. Or your skeleton won't, so you actually, as a being, spiritually become bigger by giving. Similarly, when you harm another, this causes like a thing where you have to kind of be worried they're going to harm you, because they feel like it naturally. Whereas when you're kind to them, when you're ethical, which you're just with them, that is to say, you're sensitive to what they need, and therefore you're moral in your interacting with them. Really basically kind and other regarding, you sort of do what they really need for you to do rather than damage them. And by behaving like that many, many, many lifetimes, you develop what is called your store of merit. And actually by giving in future lives, you become rich. You become bountiful and wealthy, or not necessarily rich, but food comes to you, shelter, things, possessions. You sort of just become larger and larger as a being. You become a king. You become a deity, actually. By generosity is the source of becoming a deity. And by becoming moral, you become human, actually. Because the human form, this is a really amazing thing, evolutionarily. We never think, you just think it's just natural to be human. But if you really think about it, you can and sit there like meditate in front of a mirror and look at yourself. It's kind of weird, like we have this like neck, that sticks up, and then there's the eyes sticking out, and then some ears flapping here, and tongue and nose. We concentrate all sorts of senses that we probe around the world with these things, like some kind of little thing, And then our skin is sensitive, and we have two legs and genitalia and weird organs inside. Things go gurgling hither and thither, and there's like springs and like muscle. I mean, it's just a weird machinery. Totally funny kind of machinery, the human machinery. What did it evolve from? Why didn't we just remain some kind of like little round goober, like sort of dribbling around in some sort of grease? Like rolling around in an ocean of Vaseline, just a kind of goober bouncing around. Why? And you wouldn't even need eyes. You sort of see and touch and hear and feel all with the same thing with the surface. How do we develop all these like different things? The senses and everything, the human being. But from the Buddhist view, we did that by cultivating billions and billions of lifetimes, the art of interaction. Interacting with others by being moral. Actually, we became human. Meaning, after a trillion times in many lives of being a little round sentient goober, banging into other goobers, we decided that was boring. And maybe other goobers there was something else they would prefer than being banged into. And then we learned to stroke someone, and then we wanted to be stroked, so then we wanted to have a softer skin, and etc., etc. Then we did this really strange thing, which is we decided that we would like to share our imagination with others, and that they could share their imagination with us. And then we developed language and we talked to them. But that was a huge evolution before we could talk to them, because before we never had time to talk to them, because one thing we developed early on was a mouth, so we were like, eat them first. How can you talk to somebody if you just eat them right away? First thing, as they say in Buddhism, the nature of the animal kingdom is you eat who you meet, or are eaten by who you meet. So we got into a thing where, let's chat for a while first, I think, before we see who eats who. And then when we negotiate, then of course we made a plan, let's all together go and eat somebody else, this kind of thing. So, in other words, the human form from the Buddhist evolutionary perspective evolves out of the process of interaction and developing an artful interaction. And we are these most amazing interacting beings. We don't have our skeletons outside which bang into each other. We have soft skin, we have like this and that. And it's a very interesting, and actually more of our thing is that we also don't live too long. We also die at a certain speed and frequency. And the process of dying and retaking bodies and things is also very, very important, very deep experience for us. And it gives us a different quality of being in our bodies by the fact that we leave them and return to them and leave them and return to them. Although we may live in a culture with an ideology that this just sprang out of nowhere, but that's just the nature of being in such a culture, because we're too nervous about the other possibilities. Too nerve-wracking for us. So the store of merit then, massive store of merit means that, beyond just that huge store of merit to get to become a human after having been a little slime ball, and then within being human, then becoming so great as a human, like beyond the royalty, beyond divinity, we have become so generous, we have become so moral, we have become so tolerant that we become a Buddha. It's extremely difficult. Then the store of knowledge, then knowledge comes from the more amazing thing, which then you can't explain just by the materialist evolutionary analogy, because the mind itself is this incredibly subtle energy thing, which is like the software in the hardware of the slimeware rather of the nervous system. The mind is like when you dream, the mind in its imagination can go outside of the body, can go around and experience things completely in a realm of its own fabrication. And the mind can also sense like vibrations and things without using the sensory extensions. And everyone's mind does it all the time, not just psychics. And we pick up things from far away. We don't know how to control it, and we think it's weird, and we don't have room for it in our culture. We don't have concepts for it in our culture. But it's pretty common in most cultures, and all of us have extraordinary experiences as children, for example, before we're indoctrinated not to have them. But anyway, the mind can understand things. The mind analyzes things, learns how they're made, learns how they're developed, and you gain a greater and greater knowledge of that. And in Buddhist science, the mind can actually understand how atoms work, how subatomic energies work. A human being could become a nuclear physicist without the machinery, because after all, you are nuclear physics yourself. Your neurons are subatomic particles, and atoms and cells, and they're zapping and zipping in around. Even when you see something, there's incredible photons are going in, and they go in the eye, and they go back to the optic nerve, and then they run around. They go and grab something from some synapse and match it up, and blah, 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 and then they see a human face. I mean, there's a tremendous bunch of atomic processes that are going on there, and the mind is those processes. It's aware of them, it coordinates them, and it chooses and selects from them, because right now we're seeing there's like whole huge mass of things that my mind just rules out so that I can recognize a Buddha statue, a painting, and nice, happy-looking faces. So since that's so, if we developed enough awareness of the mind of its own processes, like its own self-diagnostic program, which is where meditation comes in, then know where it's worked by sort of analysis and sort of dissection and structure and thought experiment, then we should be able to understand how the mind itself works. At least in the Buddhist sciences, they say that we can. They claim, the Buddha rejected ancient time the indivisible particle that other physicists in the ancient world, atoms, not only the Greeks, but also the Indians, they posited atoms. And the Buddha from the beginning said, no, there's no atom, in the sense that there are particles, but there's no indivisible particle, meaning an irreducible one that is the final building block of matter. There is no such thing. You keep taking them apart infinitely until it's pure energy, and then you can't even find it because the energy that you're looking is the energy that it is, and then you don't know quite what it is. So it was like taking hold of a handful of water. But the Buddha noticed that thousands of years ago without cyclotrons and electronic machinery and things. The Buddha discovered that we can understand everything, that we can understand. He said, oh, wow, I really now know everything. I mean, I am knowledge. The mind is everything, so it can know everything in a certain way. But the key, of course, you don't want to just know everything. How incredibly boring just to know everything. But what you do is you need to know everything accurately to the extent that you can avoid suffering and you can be happy. And not only that, but you can help others avoid suffering and you can help them be happy. That's what you need to know, basically. I mean, of all the things that you want to know, right? So that's a very preposterous claim, too, that there is such a thing. I mean, this whole thing about what is a Buddha is a preposterous thing from the point of view of the materialistic culture. It's a whole different, or rather it's an amazing addition to the concept of life, meaning the theory of evolution, the notion of biology that we have. In addition to, the notion of biology that we have is very useful and helpful in opening up to it, because it gives us the knowledge of how amazingly things can transform themselves. How it's unimaginable how things can transform themselves. But what this adds to that is the idea that if you desire to transform yourself into a thing of ultimate beauty, a thing of ultimate love, a thing of ultimate wisdom, you can do that. There's no limit, because there's no limitation into what you can become. Of course, one of the things that frightens people who understand that about Buddhism, that may frighten them in some cases, is that once everything is possible, then negative everything is possible as well. So there's danger in that. If you're just made by God and you can go from A to B and God will take care of it, you can feel safe. Or if of course, everyone feels really safe in the materialist culture because you're basically nothing. So you can't get into really much trouble. Because, it popped out of nowhere by random mutation, have the illusion of thinking yourself an irreducible subjectivity, but that's, professors at MIT and Brandeis tell you that's wrong. And so it must be. And then you die and you're nothing again. So then the problems are over. I mean, you're not in nirvana, you're not an infinite sort of universe of ice cream or ecstatic energy, but at least you're nothing. You're not in pain, is the point. And nothing is a hell of a lot better than pain. So those are easier. But of course, then the sacrifice of those is there's no infinitely fantastic, marvelous nirvana. No sort of possible total happiness, which the Buddhist universe, which all of Asia came to feel was possible for human beings, and which is just beginning to, as a possibility, to dawn in the West. The idea of total happiness being the evolutionary objective of every being, and particularly each one of us. It's something new. Okay, so that's the store of knowledge. Is that store of knowledge then you build up evolutionarily, and it ends up in giving you the Buddha mind, the mind of knowing everything. And then 3 incalculable aeons of lifetimes basically just means endless numbers of lifetimes. Innumerable relativities must be arranged, such as purifying the Buddhaverse. Then this is a very strange one. Then the Buddhaverse means, it's my translation, people sometimes say Buddha land or pure land. Sort of the Buddhist idea of paradise. I was talking to someone today, a retired professional theologian, who was kind of freaking out. I was talking about, I had a lecture to this group, a conflict resolution group, about Buddhism's attitude about conflict resolution and their experience in doing that throughout history and everything. And I was telling them how it actually had resolved a lot of conflicts in Asia, and that's why Asia was relatively more peaceful than the West by 1,000 years ago, and had so much beauty and art and ragas and paintings and what have you. And that's also why they succumbed to the invasions from the West, and they got beaten up and colonialized by the West, because they had become more gentle and more peaceful, because they'd resolved too many conflicts, and they weren't nasty enough to fight us off. Us and the Muslims who came there, since 1,000 years ago. And this guy was like beyond credibility. He was straining credulity. He said, well, how could that be? He said, I thought that those Buddhists, they're just a bunch of individualists and just got out of the world, and what would they care about conflict or peace or anything? They just like obliterated themselves in nirvana, which is what the Pope wrote. That's the Western misconception of Buddhism, is that Buddhism is this life-negating, depressing thing, But this is totally wrong, because how would you see, if you became a being sort of who became attuned with the subtlest energies of the world, like in a way, like you became a being that was always aware of whatever you were broadcasting, something like that, right? Like a radio station, TV set is broadcasting something, right? When it broadcasts that thing, like NBC, Tom Brokaws over there now, like talking about the White House probably, and that means that if we had a TV set and we just turned it on in the air right here, they would suddenly be talking there. Right? That means that somehow his patterns are present in the air right here now, in the airwaves, within the molecules here. And the NBC, CBS, that's why we're kind of nervous in New York. There's so much stuff in the molecule. But you become a being who's aware of your own presence around in all the molecules, because you've sort of expanded from just being, all your energy being trapped in a narrow little circle of narcissistic self-preoccupation, of me, and what, like this. And you're attuned to all of your vibrations and all of the molecules around. You know that you are the world around you. Then when you say, I want to become an enlightened being to make all other beings happy, then the I refers, at that point, is not just referring to some narrow little image of yourself as a personality, but is referring to all of the energies that you sort of in tune with, because the boundary between you and the other is not that huge. And therefore, your vow includes that the land should become a Buddha. The universe, the environment, you follow me? In other words, you become a field being first by determination, and eventually a Buddha is a being who can modify and modulate their environment. They become a universe in a sense. You follow me? Because, for example, just imagine it, this is where I was going. Imagine it like, remember I said we stick to that simple analogy, just one other person. You fall in love with this other person. That means you identify with them completely. It's like you feel like one being, but you're especially interested in the happiness of the other one. All you want to be is an instrument of that happiness. That's what makes you happy, right? There's no conflict. Usually it's like either you get an extra pea or 2 more strawberries, or I get them, or how we split up that chocolate. But in this case, the more chocolate you get, the happier I am. So, I enjoy it through your enjoyment, right? Now, in that case, I become concerned with your clothes, with the couch you sit in, with the car where you live. I want to become your environment, right? When you're in love with someone. You want to enfold them entirely in your awareness and concern, and want their environment to be optimal, right? You wouldn't just say, oh yeah, I'm going to sit back here, separated from you, and then you be happy, and I don't want anything to do with it. Not at all. I'm going to love you remotely or something, you want to be completely enfolded with what you're in love with, right? So then imagine falling in love with the whole universe, with all being, meaning willing the happiness of that whole universe, wanting it all to be happy. When you do that, then you automatically extend yourself out to, see that the lawn is mowed, that the flowers border is beautiful, that the house is beautiful, that the neighborhood is beautiful, that no harm comes to anyone in it, etc., etc., etc. And apparently, again, because you have infinite time to expand to do this, you then start modulating the fields and the grasses and the cells, and you send out your good vibration, become effective good vibrations that actually changes the universe. There's much literature in Buddhism, like the Pure Land Sutras and other things, which we won't have time to read, but you can go on to read if you end up studying these things, that are amazing visions of Buddha worlds or Buddha verses, where the world is no longer a universe, something turning around my one self, but a Buddha verse, a thing that is completely suffused with enlightenment, meaning the will for the happiness and the beauty and the perfection of everything. That will become affected energy. So therefore, like in the Vimalakirti Sutra, favorite sutra of mine, is a famous thing where Buddha's talking about this Buddha verse transformation, like I was earlier to the guy today. And one of his own disciples was rejecting that and saying, well, Buddha, I thought that you said that, it's universe is kind of a hopeless case, better to attain nirvana. And I imagined that nirvana was outside the universe. And even I attained a kind of state of feeling as if I was sort of outside. I felt it's a transcendent state. And now you're telling me that the universe itself, you can be outside while within, and that the universe itself is bliss and all this? What are you talking about? And Buddha said, well, it is, because giving and generosity, for example, the Bodhisattva's Buddha land is a field of generosity. You give and give to beings, right? But then you give to your loved one, right? You give jewels, you give this, you give that, you give happiness, you give everything you can think of. And then you really continue, then you want her to have, or him to have, or them to have, you want them to have a beautiful place to be in themselves. Then you want them to have a more beautiful body. You want them to have fantastic energy and health. You want them to have a Taj Mahal. You want to change their whole environment and being when you give. You see? And then, ideally, you want to create a thing that itself just gives to them all the time. You see? Like a place of beauty, like a flower that blooms flowers, and then that gives them pleasure to see the flower. You can't always constantly be dishing something out. You want the environment to dish it out, you see. So then, if you become a Buddha and you give and give and give to all beings, where you then want a universe that is just pure generosity. And a Buddha verse, apparently, you can just eat the ground. It's delicious, It gives itself to you to be eaten, the ground. You eat the rug, eat the pillar, eat the concrete. Sniff the air and get totally energized. The Buddha, and they're described like that. And of course, they use analogies like jewels and nectars and things like that. But you can read, they have these incredible palaces that are 70,000 stories high, filled with heavenly musicians playing guitars and singing and throwing flowers, and the whole tower is made of interwoven flower petals. And it's, just incredibly unbelievable. But visionary, when you read it, your imagination suddenly thinks of something that is almost impossible to think about. So that's what that's purifying the Buddha-verse, or perfecting the Buddha-verse. So they say, so then this is, of course, leads to a very amazing thing that today, for example, we think we're here in the 20th century, and this doomsday is coming up, all the monotheists who have these prophecies and these schedules, they think it's 2000, the millennium, Jerry Falwell's going to get us all, and Satan is coming, or whatever, and it's really doomsday, everything's polluted and overpopulated, et cetera, but in the Buddhist view, we're still in a universe that is actually subterraneously, and there's a lot of literature about this in Buddhism, controlled by the compassion of the Buddha. It isn't controlled in an omnipotent way. That's the tricky thing, because the Buddhas never claimed to be omnipotent. They never claimed to create the world. But it's this power of infinite modulation, so that it's kind of still arranged. We all still have the opportunity to awaken, to find our own happiness, to be able to make others that we love really happy. We have still this possibility. And apparently it's like, the notion of an angelic force, or the theistic notion of the divine providence that wants the happiness of people. Although they tend to make it in the Western thing in there because of, it all came out of a desert where there was always scarcity. It's like some people get it and the rest get like thrown in the fire. But in the Buddhist thing, everyone gets it. Even all animals, even the cockroaches, even every being, even every piece of slime gets into the Buddha-verse type of thing. Because once we become enlightened ourselves, then we make the Buddha-verse. In other words, there's an infinite wave of positivity that goes. See? So that's purifying the Buddha-verse. Fulfilling the vows. There are, in the Sukhavati Sutra, they list the 48 vows of Amitabha Buddha, who vowed that his land would be like this, and beings will be reborn there whenever they just think of it, and etc. And you make all these special kind of vows that when I'm a Buddha, I want this and that to happen. And I want beings to have this and that. Like when they just look at a flower, they'll realize the exquisite, delicate nature of life, and they'll become completely ecstatic just by seeing the flower or something. In my universe, there'll be a universe that teaches by flowers. Some people don't want to teach and give lectures. They just want to generate flowers that when people see them, they become released and ecstatic by just seeing the flower. There are Buddha verses like that. Actually, in the Vimalakirti Sutra, there's a Buddha verse where beings live in, it's called the incense Buddha verse. And everybody is incense. The bodies are all incense, the trees, the land, the Buddha, everything is incense in that universe. And instead of coming, you would come to Tibet House in that universe to learn about Buddhism, but all you would do was just sniff. And the Buddha would just sit there, but he wouldn't talk, and you just sit down under an incense tree or in front of an incense flower, and you just sniff like that, and suddenly you'd conceive the spirit of enlightenment. You'd go into like 1 billion samadhis, this kind of thing. And they have, but although then they say that's not as good as our universe, is even better than that, because we become too self-indulged there, it's too godlike. You see, Buddhas don't let us lounge around like God, like just sniffing, and having 1 billion samadhis. But that's good for it. That builds wisdom. We become more and more vast in our knowledge, but nobody irritates us in such a place, and we can't really grow without being irritated. Apparently, I don't like this one, but that's what they say. But you see, beauty comes from tolerance. So we wouldn't be beautiful if we just sniffed all the time. In fact, we'd sort of become like elephants. We'd have long sniffing trunks. Whereas when people bother you, then you have to overcome your anger. Then that makes you beautiful. That's if you're beautiful in this life, it's because you were very tolerant in the previous life. They say that's the true beauty secret: is being tolerant, patient. They say multi-life. Sometimes I think. Anyway, so fulfilling the vows, and so. But anyway, you would have different Buddhas have different vows. Shakyamuni had his vow that he wanted a maximally efficient Buddha verse, where beings would have the best opportunity to become enlightened, and the greatest number of beings could achieve the greatest amount of enlightenment in the shortest amount of time. And so somehow that's our history, apparently. And that's on our world today is in the brink of some incredible enlightenment thing in the sort of esoteric side. But even that is hidden from most people and most Buddhists in the Tibetan view anyway, because then they would become complacent, and then they would think like the Tibetans are, and they would think, oh well, we'll just naturally Buddha will take care of it, and they wouldn't struggle themselves. They wouldn't make effort, because we have to make it. Because it's like understanding something. You have to make an effort yourself. No one else can understand it for you. Buddhism, in that sense, is not really a religion. It is not. It's an education system. And the first thing, it's an education system based on the idea that education itself is evolutionary. And evolution can be made to have a purpose. It doesn't actually by itself have a purpose, but it can be made to by love and compassion. Love can determine that evolution, my evolution, your evolution is going to have a purpose, and that purpose is going to be your happiness, my happiness. And so that is what Buddhism is really. See, religion is like, if you believe this, then you'll be fine. But belief alone will not help you evolve enough. It can be good, make you feel calm, it can make you have a positive, if you believe in the right thing, for the right reasons. Now, blind belief is very weak and feeble, fickle. It has no real staying power because it's blind. But, reasonable belief is useful, but it still can't transform you to the degree that knowledge can. Only knowledge can finally make you enlightened. And developing the continuum of the disciples developing the souls of the disciples. That is, a Buddha in a Buddha verse has to be reborn and reborn in infinite ways with many, many millions of beings to develop them and ripen them and help them to evolve. So it is very difficult to arrange so many relativities. Imagine how difficult it has been to arrange a Tibet house in New York. Imagine how to arrange a Buddha planet, a Buddha verse, so that everybody on the planet has their maximum awakening. Imagine. But actually, I mean, it's very possible, isn't it? I mean, think about it today. You know, Buddha was not able to get on CNN because there was no CNN. Buddha, you know, today, if Buddha were there, Buddha could reach billion, I mean, they could give him an Academy Award, witnessed by 3 billion people. So for some reason, nobody puts him on the tube, or they haven't found him to photograph yet. They somehow think they can't sell him. They think they can't sell the Buddha. But actually, Buddha's been pretty, you know, the Buddha business has been reasonably profitable if you look at the balance sheet over a couple thousand years. So maybe they will discover that it could be beneficial and profitable, and they'll decide to promote the Buddha. Imagine a PR campaign, Young and Rubicam. Promote enlightenment. Get on every channel. Spend billions of dollars. Because then people will be inspired that they can be happy, they will do the positive thing, they will do this and that, they won't make a war, they won't destroy and blow up this place and that place. It could easily happen. It could. That would be an arranging of relativities. It might be hard to arrange it, but it might happen, actually. Therefore, this world is usual, but you know, since it's so hard, he says, this Tibetan guy, therefore this world is usually sunken in ages of darkness, and the illuminated aeon of a Buddha's advent is barely a possibility. But think today, of course I shouldn't be too optimistic, think today now, how many people today are thinking what we are thinking, even though we're just thinking about it for a minute? And many people are looking bemused and like it's silly, and they know that they're worrying about dodging traffic in the minute they get out the door and all this. But still we're thinking about the possibility of a really happy world, a world of enlightened beings, a world where everyone is in love with everyone else. And also, I mean, don't think it would be like some sort of mass orgy or something. I mean, if everybody loved everybody else, you wouldn't be jumping all over each other. That would be like tiresome. People would be kind of leaving each other alone a bit. You know, there'd be such good vibrations around. Imagine, people wouldn't feel big compulsive drives and needs to hop around that much. Right? They'd be kind of cool, you know, and they would really see others and see the beauty in them. And then would anybody let someone like starve in the street? No way, you know. They'd take them home, you know, and here and there, or make a home or something. They have many people, there are people who have hundreds of homes, or they even have, a billionaire must have the ability to have thousands or tens of thousands of homes. If they put all that billion into just homes, they couldn't possibly be in every room of every home in the rest of their life. They wouldn't, you know, unless they ran, maybe they got Nike shoes or something and ran quickly to get in every room, you know. You have so many buildings with so many rooms in them. For billions and billions of dollars. So if they just shared some of those with some people, everyone, why couldn't everybody have homes? And then people, oh, then they breed like rabbits. They don't. As soon as they have like a little bit, they stop breeding, actually. Then the Swedish government has to come and pay them to have a kid. Because they don't want to have any more kids because they feel so comfortable and they want to go to the movies. You know? And nobody else wants to babysit. So then they have few kids. And then the women don't want to be having like 15 childbirths all the time. They don't do that when they're poor and oppressed and downtrodden and living under some moronic, demonic ideology. Like maximum productivity for something else. Living like some slave. So, but what is dark? What are ages of darkness? Now, how many people having such a fantasy? I'm sorry, I went back into fantasy. I like it so much. How many people are having such a thing, a thought tonight? How many people are sitting on the banks of the river thinking about how to hunt the heads of the people upriver in the next village? And that's all there is to it, is just hunt another head. You know, maybe beating some drums and bum, bum, bum. You know? How many people are sitting on Wall Street thinking about hunting some heads? Or thinking about which window they're going to jump out when Brazil goes? Or, I mean, how many people have a real idea that there's such a thing as real happiness that they can have? Or thinking about who they're going to imprison, how they're going to lock them up. In the whole planet now, of the 6 billion humans, never mind the animals who are all running around eating each other, eating whoever they meet. How many humans are thinking about liberation, freedom, becoming really happy in such a way that everyone is happy, making others really happy, loving everything and everyone? How many people think such a thing is possible on this planet at this minute? Or even if they don't even really think that it's possible, even having a notion that it might be possible? Very, very few. Well, many can't be blamed. They're like, have you ever seen those pictures of those people in Brazil who have to work in those mines? You know, in these huge human slime pits, crawling around like trying to find an emerald or something and killing it, you know, like unbelievable human misery. In China, they're like crawling all over the Tibetans, and they're like mining gold and destroying the yaks and wrecking the forest and running around and this and that. And then so many people live in slums and sewers in all of the developed worlds, quote unquote, and Philippines and places that live in just shacks and hovels and sewers and things. People then who live in big places, they're just worrying about how much their stocks are doing, and they're feeling very nervous and taking tranquilizers. That's what he means by people almost always are plunged in this age of darkness, meaning that it's such a gloomy horizon. And they're all like, you know, basically the materialism of this planet is causing everyone on the planet to basically commit kind of mass suicide. The so-called Western civilization, which, you know, I can't get away from Gandhi's joke nowadays. Western civilization, is it? Someone said, no, actually they said to him, well, Mr. Gandhi, what about American civilization? Actually, that's what they said. He said, American civilization? Well, that would be a good idea. He said, that would be a good idea. You know, thinking about all the genocide here. Here we're living in a country. We're all haunted by this huge genocide of everybody in America. Slaves, mass slaves. You know. How many? 500 Indian nations slaughtered. You know. Nobody does. If you did a title search on any land or anywhere in America, you wouldn't own it. People, I pay taxes on land. I like my land, but I don't really own it because I didn't. The original person stole it and killed the people. You know. And we know that, and we're haunted. And then we have all these big machines, and they run around, and we have nuclear weapons to point them at everybody. You know. And really, we're, you know, if our present trajectory. I mean, honestly speaking, if you really honestly take stock of what our culture is, it is a culture of mass suicide. It is a lemming culture. Blowing out the ozone layer, zapping around in huge jets and wrecking, making more holes in everything, pushing poison into the food chain like mad, throwing more and more chemicals on the field, driving 90% of American farmers off the land, even the guys who work the land, even if they didn't originally get it honestly, they work it honestly, and then kick them all off, have agribusiness buy it, use it like a commodity. I mean, it's nuts. It's an age of darkness. It is. And then you go to Columbia, go to my school, you know, and go to this school and that I went. I was a WASP. I was born in New York. I was not allowed Latin in third grade, French. Learn, excel, memorize, recite Men of Harlech in the gloaming. Be white. We invented everything. We win, we won, we control. We had the empire. We can go to Oxford, get a fellowship, and then affect a British accent for the rest of your life. Be respected by people with a fake British accent. But never stop for a minute and enjoy anything. No, reinvest, get back, get more. And then, of course, die. And then mess up the planet more. And, you know, make billions of dollars. To do with what? That's the age of darkness. It's too primitive. Really? I'm sorry. It is. Instead of that, human life, human brain, billions and billions of possible pleasures, billions of insights, billions of like joys, billions of altruistic creations. To any one of us could make billions laugh. Make billions happy by sewing or painting one precious thing and having it on TV, seen by billions. The human brain is capable of this if it's allowed to open, if it's allowed to find its potential. But we have no idea there's such a potential. The neurologists, we only use 8% of it. What's the rest of it for? My favorite one is the women, you poor things. Your brains are more redundant than men's. So it's all useless, most of it. You only need like 2% to drive down the freeway. And that's all human life is for, is, buy something from somebody that then turns you back into a beetle again. Do that and then drive quickly, burning gas around for the rest of your life. Maybe get a car phone for the traffic jam. So it is very difficult to arrange so many relativities. It is very hard for beings caught in this world's life cycle to develop even a tiny virtuous mind. Whatever virtue they do develop relies only on the Buddha's power. Meaning, well, here that more broadly meaning like the idea of altruism, the idea of some sort of evolutionary purpose. If it is so very rare to have a tiny good feeling such as faith in the Buddha, why mention how rare it is for one to develop ethical discernment about evolutionary actions through finding faith in the three jewels, or to be moved by transcendent renunciation to abandon longing for mundane successes and learn the path of liberation? How much of our lives? Count the minutes, 24 hours of the day. How much 60 times 24? How many minutes of the day? How many seconds of the day? How many seconds of any day do we spend thinking about freedom? About nirvana? Or about real happiness? It's lasting happiness, not just the next pleasure, good meal, real happiness, either for ourselves or anyone else. And how much do we think, well, I'll think about that when I relax after dinner, after working all day. We work all day for what? To pay the rent, to pay the taxes, to save some money, to pay this mortgage, to pay that other thing. Never is enough, actually. We charge a couple of things, and we have to have a new set of them because the old ones are out of fashion or they're made so shoddily. Or, to pump up, jogging or running or building up a muscle or something like that, which is going to become like worm food. Count the minutes that you spend on something truly transcendental in life. And there'll be very few. We sleep half of them. That's kind of transcendental for high anxiety people, of course, especially if you sleep well. But transcendent renunciation to abandon longing for mundane successes. I mean, by now, don't we know that every time you get success, you make a buck, you worry about losing it next second. You get that diploma, you worry, what's next? What'll I do with it? How much is it worth? You finish the book, then you have to go sell the book. I'm sorry I wrote so many books. I am. First time, I wasn't until I went on a book tour. And I walked in one bookstore from that perspective of worrying about my book. There were so many books in there, like, come on, read me, get me this one, that one. You felt embarrassed to add one more to it. People are so busy they could read, no one could read all the content of any one bookstore. It's absolutely embarrassing to add more to it, really. More, it's all junk, paper, pages, most of it junk. So many of them. Instead of relaxing, workaholically writing them and everybody reading them, read them all. Oh yeah, I've always wanted to read the complete Balzac. Take at least 10 years. Transcendent renunciation, meaning giving up these things that we know are not satisfying. We know they just lead to desiring more. They don't really create a genuine, satisfying, self-constituting happiness. They just make us more and more addicted to this and to that and to the other. If it is so very rare to be moved by transcendence to learn the path of liberation, why mention how rare it is to be moved by the precious spirit of enlightenment that cherishes others over self, to learn and constantly practice for many incalculable aeons the ocean of bodhisattva deeds? This is what a Buddha is, okay? So a Buddha is a being that is the evolutionary perfection imaginable by a human being. Like, just think of, a single being the Starship Enterprise. Actually, the closest I think that I ever saw almost was V'ger. Remember V'ger? Remember the Star Trek where the guy married the computer? Frank Converse actually is a friend of mine, the actor. You don't remember that show? There was this computer called V'ger, which turned out to be Voyager, but some of the letters had been rubbed off, and it was going berserk and it was going to destroy the world, and it had come back to the world and had grown huge and enormous and like filled the whole environment with its energy and was frustrated. It was lonely, V'ger was. But it was going to destroy anything that didn't have the right code answer, its program had gone berserk. And then finally this guy had to unite with V'ger. It was like one of these Tibetan tantric yabyums, male-female union, but man and machine. Of course she was female, she had a female voice, luckily. And then when they united, somehow the human component with the machine, which had this vast reach throughout the universe, it was like, became a Buddha and she became the Buddha-verse, you see. And then they somehow blessed the whole universe and they disappeared in vast waves of light. And the idea was they were sort of there to be, to sort of help humanity infinitely was the sort of good, the happy ending of the movie. But you guys didn't see that. You people should go to more science fiction if you want to understand Buddhism. Really. Babylon 5 is Dharma, it's the Buddha's teaching. Star Trek is the Buddha's teaching. So that's kind of the closest that I can imagine. So what it is a Buddha is this incredible summit of evolution that everyone can achieve, and that some people, infinite numbers of people have achieved, actually, according to their view. And in therefore basic Buddhism, this is the first thing to understand. And it's not that hard also to imagine, because all of the Asian Buddhist cultures had this vision. They do not confuse, really. They know that the Buddhas are not gods. They can take godly forms, but they're not gods. They know that they're not humans. And therefore they know that their own lives have the potential of becoming this extraordinary type of being. And they also know that that's the really only worthwhile thing to wish out of their evolution. And so when they give a gift, a little cup of something, or when they don't get mad at somebody when they do something to them, they are doing it in the line of that is moving their evolution towards this final goal type of thing. So therefore they think of that Buddha, the fact that there was a Buddha, that there is a Buddha in the universe, and that it's a possibility of them to become a Buddha, is something that's like a precious gem that you discover. Like you discover a great big magic gem, or like a genie bottle, you can make a wish and it will come true. Well, there are infinite numbers of them. There are Buddhas in every atom, actually. There's microverses and mini-universes, vast galaxies, Milky Ways and everything inside each little atom, and there's millions of Buddhas in those. And there's millions of them here. But in our local environment of this planetary cosmos, there are 1,000 Buddhas in this particular aeon. This cosmos has, this is a very important point, there's no beginning in the universe in Buddhism. Buddha solved the chicken and the egg problem definitively by saying there's no first thing, there's no beginning. There was always another chicken and another egg type of thing. Easy way out for the uninteresting question, actually. And there's the universe is beginningless, it's also endless. It's also infinite. All ideas that humans have that there's sort of a finite universe like this is just to make themselves feel like they have some dimension. Because, if you sort of expand to the idea of infinity, it sort of makes you dissolve, it kind of dissolves your sense of self-importance. You know what I mean? It really does, if you're really open to the idea of infinity. That's why people have kind of wonderful aesthetic experience in the night sky, in a place away from a city or something where you really see the depth of the night sky. You kind of dissolve into the vastness, So, in this local, however, period of this cosmos, from the so many 20 billion year sort of thing, within the yuga or the age that they say, there are 1,000 Buddhas. Shakyamuni Buddha, who was here 2,500 years ago, was the fourth. Maitreya Buddha, who will come in the future, and there are different views in Buddhism ranging from 5,000 years in the future to 100,000 years in the future. There are sort of different cosmologies. He will be the fifth, and then that goes up to 1,000 type of thing. But in one cosmos. Then there's another one that actually about only 300 years from now, Shangri-La, the advent of Shangri-La will take place, and the whole planet will become like a Shangri-La. And then there will be plenty of Buddhas all around, So there's a different timeline that intersects with it, that doesn't go for that long, slow schedule. But in different layers and levels of Buddhism, they have different schedules type of thing. They have multiple cosmologies, in other words. A Supreme Emanation Buddha is really weird. I mean, it's like a kind of cone head or something. It has this different head, and there's the lights coming out of his ears all the time, and people are like always disoriented by a Buddha. You read in the literature, people walk into the presence of a Buddha like that, and it's like a big light show, and he has a funny little tuft of white hair that's constantly sending beams of light out that are disorienting people. What they call a Supreme Emanation Buddha is a very weird special effect embodiment. He has like webbed fingers, like a platypus. I mean, he really is weird. But you see, to have this kind of Supreme Emanation special effect Buddha type like Shakyamuni, the beings on the planet at the time have to all be ripened. That's where he says all the relativities have to be arranged. They have to be ready for this radical dislocation thing. Like, I mean, if Shakyamuni, like in that form, walked in here, now, many of us might feel frightened or disoriented. It would be too powerful for us because our imaginations are a little too, they're not used to such a rich diet or something like that, and we would get all frightened and disoriented, you know what I mean? We'd have to slowly build up to being able to think about it, the way they say it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.